Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our TACA Resiliency Workshop on cross-departmental metrics and goal setting. My name is Maura Scheffler. I'm the Director of Programs here at TACA, the Arts Community Alliance. The past 18 months has challenged all of us in totally new and unexpected ways, and I know we've all continuously been adapting to meet the present moments as they all arise. So supporting each of you in that adaptation is really why we TACA teamed up with TRG Arts, an industry leader in arts analytics, loyalty development, and pricing strategies. This workshop today is the second in a four-part series we're doing with TRG as part of our Resiliency Workshops series called the Comeback Collection that focuses on rebuilding relationships as we emerge from the pandemic. Each session balances teaching time, full group discussions, and breakout time also for you to put those tools that you learn into action. If you missed the first session, A-okay, don't worry. You can watch the recording of it anytime before the end of January 2022. And Greg will drop the link in the chat. Greg, my illustrious colleague, our senior programs manager here at TACA. And you can always stay up to date on the most recent information on our resiliency workshops at taca-arts.org/resiliency-workshops. A key part of our partnership with TRG also includes monthly office hours where you can bring questions directly to TRG's consultants. You can meet with them, and that will help you keep your work progressing between each of our formal sessions across these 10 months. I absolutely want to extend our thanks to the Sapphire Foundation for their support of this series, and also for Communities Foundation of Texas just for their ongoing support of TACA's capacity building programming. Before I introduce our two facilitators from TRG, I want to do a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, if you would please click the box with the 3 dots in the corner of your screen and rename yourself to make sure that you include both your name and your organization name, because that will help us with our breakouts later. Please be sure to mute yourself if you're not already, just to make sure everyone has the best experience possible. And then if you want to send questions, just use the chat function, unless Tethra or Caitlin tell you to do otherwise. Please use the chat to send those questions, and we'll be monitoring that today as we go. Okay. Our first facilitator this afternoon is Caitlin Green. Caitlin's based in Pittsburgh, and she works with new clients to identify opportunities for partnership and services as a senior consultant for North American clients at TRG. Prior to joining TRG, she was a marketing and development director for TheaterWorks and the director of the Galleries of Contemporary Art at the University of Colorado. She holds an MA in art history and a Master of Public Administration in Nonprofit Management. Our second facilitator, Tethra Thurg, is a Washington, D.C. based consulting analyst for TRG. She uses data to help organizations find the results they need to be sustainable and create impact. Previously, she was the Director of Engagement and Arts Partnerships at Calamity Dance, where she led the organization's fundraising and communications. She's also worked in education at Arena Sage, as a consultant for the NEA, where she did qualitative analysis for their folk and traditional artworks program. And she's a dancer and choreographer who's committed to raising awareness for Indian classical dance through performance and education. She holds a bachelor's degree in communication studies from NYU and a master of public policy from the University of Maryland, College Park. I think Caitlin is going to get us started today. So Caitlin, I turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Maura. Thanks, Greg, and all of you for being here, and TACA, of course, for hosting these sessions. It's really our pleasure. Tethra, if you would go ahead and start our screen share, I think we're ready to get this going. So here we are. Session 2 of the Comeback Collective. We've seen many of your faces before, or names for those of you who don't have your cameras on, and it is a pleasure to be back here with you. For those of you who are meeting for the first time, just a quick note about who we are. We work for TRG. We're a consulting firm that is all about teaching and learning, and for us, data is at the center of that, and conversations like these. So I hope that you walk away from today with new things, and I am certain that we will as well. As Maura said, we have 4 parts here. Part 1 was about reigniting sales. Greg has dropped the link in there. This was all about campaign planning that is entirely replicable across all of the different business lines that you have in your organization, but also outside of this time. Important here in the pandemic, but it's really a new way of thinking about how we start our campaigns. And this work has 4 steps, right? It starts with segmentation, understanding who we're talking to, because all of our audiences are not the same, and all of the audiences we seek to serve are not the same. And then empathizing with their needs, creating really simple campaigns and strategies for communicating with them, and then building experimentation into our process that lets us understand what's working and what's not, so that we can keep our patrons at the center of our work. Today, we're going to build on this in part 2, which I've called silo busting. So today we're going to break down some silos. We're not really going to break them down today, but today we're going to talk about how you might break them down in your organizations, really to build these patron-centric campaigns that help you see efficiencies, maximize revenues, and more than anything, build really strong relationships with the people that you serve. So I'm going to cue you up with just a few things to listen for today. First is change. Where do you need new approaches in your work? What can you change? What can't you, and why? New perspectives. Where can you change your thinking, and in this case, your goal setting, so that you're really keeping patrons at the center of your activities? And finally, let's talk about action. 2021 is dwindling here. I can't believe we are here in mid-August, and yet, what can you do in the remainder of this year? What commitments can you make, and what action can you take that will help you realize changes sooner rather than later? So I hope you get a little bit of all of that today. I would also say Maura's right. I mean, yes, use chat, but if, as Chitra and I are talking, if you've got a question, we're in a meeting room for a reason and not in a webinar. So take yourself off mute and don't worry about interrupting us. Ask us to repeat something we've said or clarification, ask questions. We welcome that as we go through. All right. So let's talk about silos. If there are any contemporary art fans out there, you might recognize this photograph by Bert and Hilla Becker. They were a couple that spent 50 years or more photographing similar architectures all over Germany, and grain silos were of particular interest to them. So silos come from this word, right? It's grain storage, and yet now it is solidly in management jargon. You've all probably heard it. Many of you have used it. Maybe you're thinking about it a lot with your colleagues, with your boards, and in your organizations. But today, as we talk about this, what we mean is when we have silos, it means that people aren't connected or efficiently communicating, planning, and measuring together, that we've got these siloed operations that just aren't connected in ways we want to. Now, we talk with our clients a lot about the silos between marketing and development, us and them, our patrons, my patrons, their patrons, and start to cleave down the middle of areas of responsibility, influence, and patron relationships. Now, both of these departments have huge revenue generating goals, and sometimes they can end up working at odds with one another here. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I don't have a marketing or development colleague. It's just me, and I'm not siloed. And I'm here to tell you from experience, you can be a party of one and absolutely be siloed in your thinking. I was, and I see it now in how I was structuring both marketing and development campaigns as totally separate entities. I would assign things like stewardship to development and never think about stewarding my single ticket buyers. I would think about renewing subscribers, but not often upgrading them into donation in really active ways. Now, many of you, whether you're silos of one or part of a silo or a collaborative team in an organization, are probably much smarter than I was when I was doing these things. And yet, I would challenge you today, whether you're a part of a large team and a big organization, or you're doing this work, alone or with a board or a very small team, to think about where your thinking is siloed and how you can start to break down some of those barriers. So in chat, we'd just like to see what silos exist in your organizations and thinking. Do you have that marketing development riff? Is it with box office? Is it between board and staff? Where do you see silos in your thinking or in your organization? Give me just a minute to type here, and we can see whose head is in what space as we come into this. Or you can take yourself off mute and just yell it out. That's fine too. Okay, I'm not buying it that nobody has siloed organizations or thinking. So I'm going to keep going, but I do want to see these come in because this will help us in our conversation make sure that we serve you in the place that you are today. Perhaps if your colleague is in the room with you, you don't want to say it, send it in a private message to Tethra so she can make sure we're addressing things in the way that you'd like to see it. Okay, great. Yeah, Maura, how are we really consciously connecting marketing and development activities? It's an easy place for there to be this cleave that starts to separate us. I'm sure you've got colleagues in the room that might agree. So all of this work, if we want to de-silo, what it really takes is alignment. And a place to start this conversation about alignment is here with Simon Sinek, who wrote a book called The Infinite Game. And in The Infinite Game, he introduces the idea of just cause. Now, your just cause is linked to your why. If you know Simon Sinek, it always starts with the why. And our why is our noble purpose of being and comes from our past. It's essentially an origin story of sorts that says, this is why we exist in the way that we exist and to serve some purpose. We're responding to something that happened, and that's made us the superheroes, I suppose, that we are today. Now, he takes this a step further in The Infinite Game and talks about just cause. Your just cause is your why, but it's projected far off into the future. In fact, so far into the future that in your lifetime, it will never happen. These are unattainable goals, but they're what your organization ultimately wants to become. And maybe that's around patron relationships or the product that you create. But it is super ambitious. It is wholly unachievable because it lives so far out on the horizon. But because it's so far out on the horizon, we can always see it. So we can track every step and every decision that we make against it, knowing that we're still working toward the same thing. So getting your organization and your key stakeholders on board with what your just cause is will ensure that you're all in the same ocean. That's a place that you want to be as you try and figure out the next steps to take as you navigate a pandemic, as you blossom through recovery and come back into hopefully a new and better normal way of working. Now, you may have a strategic plan. Oh my God, there's so many words on this slide. They're really good words, but you can read them. You'll get this later. You may have a strategic plan that has outlined a lot of your goals for the year. But if not, that's a place where you should start the conversation with your key stakeholders and within your organization. Where do we want to go this year? What are the steps we're taking with that just cause in our sights? How are we going to navigate the path immediately ahead of us? Having these goals assure that you're in the same boat. And these are the kinds of goals that we might be looking at. Relationships, internally and externally. What does success look like in this year? This could be about retention rates. It could be about staff satisfaction. You all will know what's critical to your organization in this moment. Revenue, from whom and when? When do we expect revenue to come in? And truly, who are we relying on that revenue for? And I don't just mean ticket buyers. I mean, are we talking about new to file ticket buyers, returning ticket buyers, longtime ticket buyers, people from our neighborhood, people not from our neighborhood? How are you defining where your revenue is going to come from based on those relationships? Your audience, who are they? And what do they look like? Will they come back? Are you inviting people who are likely to say yes for a second invitation, or are they here just for the night? And how do we manage those relationships well? Learning as an organization, as a team of one, as a board of 75, what skills or tools or conversations do you need to be able to, what do you need to perfect or hone or start so that you can advance toward your season-long, your year-long goals? And then finally, what do you need to stop doing? We are so good in arts and culture. I've worked in it my whole life. 20 years I've been in arts and culture. We always want to do more. Let's do another. Let's add. Let's also. We're so good at yes and. I'm not actually good at improv at all, but I have absolutely adopted in my work life the yes and mentality. Can you do this, Caitlin? Yes, and I can do this as well. But in fact, the pandemic has given us a moment to stop doing almost everything. And I hope that as you're coming back into recovery, you're thinking about what we need to stop doing. What do we need to not restart as we come into this so that your relationships here are really honed and your resources are really honed on these sorts of goals. Now, again, you may have these goals in another place. If you've got them, fantastic. If you don't, start them here. In chat, again, I'm curious if you would share a couple of your top goals for this year. What is your organization thinking about? Is it about growth, retention, developing new staff skills, honing products? As you move back into likely more live and in-person events, what are your goals? Yeah, growing and emerging, your young and emerging donor base, absolutely. Starting to see that transition from ticket buyers into donors. How are we stewarding the relationships with our ticket buyers so that we can ask for something else, something more? Customer service, oh man, absolutely. Talk about a need and a space and a place for empathy. If your frontline team is really leading with empathy right now, these relationships that they're managing on a day-to-day basis will be so much stronger coming out of this pandemic. Re-engaging. Yeah, we've got a dormant database now, don't we? Many organizations do. We didn't have the right invitation for them. We might not have had any invitations for them over the last year. So how do we bring back those people who we're closest to? Safety. This is a totally new goal, right? We are rethinking what it means to create safe space for our actors, our artists, musicians, and our audiences. Absolutely. This is great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your goals. Drop them in here. We won't read them all, but your peers, I'm sure, would like to see where your focus is this year, and it'll help your conversations as we move forward today. Okay, so we've got goals, and I'm sorry, my screen is freezing. We've got our goals, and now we have to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction. So our just cause keeps us in the same ocean. Our goals all get us all in the same boat, but now you need everybody who's on that boat going in the same place or going toward the same place at the same time. So this is truly where alignment comes in. Now, for us at TRG, we really use data to help manage this boat rowing metaphor, because data provides context and information that the whole team, again, regardless of the size, this can be your board, this can be key stakeholders, funders, of course, this is all part of your network. It gives everyone an opportunity to start at a level playing field, and it allows you to strip some emotion away from your decision making. It gives you a baseline so that you know what progress looks like or where you have fallen short, so that you can redeploy resources in different and new ways from this. And of course, it's results focused. We are a firm that likes action. You could see that from just how I started in all of this, and results help us measure the effectiveness of our action. So today, Chithra is going to introduce you to 6 different key metrics. 5? Chithra, no, I don't remember. You're going to five. Chithra is going to introduce us to 5 key metrics that you might employ in your organizations to support some silo busting. So Chithra, I turn this back to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, silo busting and 5 metrics. For some reason it's not. Oh, there you go. Okay, I have advanced. Okay, so before we jump into these metrics, Caitlin had mentioned that one slide with lots of words. There are going to be a lot of words on some of these slides, but it's because we want to have this be a takeaway for all of you that you can go back to and reference and have something to work with. So don't worry, you don't need to be necessarily reading everything on the slide, because I'm going to be going along and explaining all of it and talking through all of it for you. So the first metric that we think you should start measuring, if you aren't already, is the percentage of your database that is active. And here's how you would calculate that. You would take the households you have had some activity with within the last 2 years, and then you want to divide that by all of your households from the last 6 years. And now, why 6, you ask? It doesn't have to exactly be 6, right? Some of you may not even have 6 years worth of data in your databases, and that's fine. But some of you may have way more than 6 years, and chances are anything beyond that period of time is not really going to be very useful for you at this moment. So we want to take this percentage, right? Because it's a really quick measure of churn. How long do your patrons stick around? We want to hold on to them because we want really sticky patrons so that they will continue to build relationship with us. So once you have this percentage, how then would you use it? We would say, let's let it inform your campaign investment. Is your percentage really high? Are you actually engaging the vast majority of the folks in your database already? Okay, then you should actually be thinking about acquiring new patrons. And acquisition is really resource heavy, as we all know. So how are you now budgeting the extra dollars and the time that it's going to take and need to get folks to say yes to your next season? But if the percentage is really low, then now you have this opportunity to reactivate all of these patrons that have had a long relationship with you, but haven't done much with you in a while. So here's what these numbers can look like. These are 20 different client examples. And you can see there's a huge range here, right? You can imagine that the organization that has a 20% of their database active is going to invest really differently than the organization that has 72% active. But you can also see that a lot of these organizations are in that 40 to 50% range, which puts them right in the center. And so if you do this and you find that you're in that middle range, in that case, what you want to be thinking about is how then does that metric align with your goals as an institution? Who are these 50%? Are the people we already have going to get us to where we want to go over the next season, over the next 2 years, over the next 5 years? Do we need new people to build relationships with? What's the budget that we have actually, and what can we do with what we have? But this percentage also lets you measure against a goal that you can set for yourself, right? So, okay, by the end of the season, our goal is to go from 42% where we are right now to 50%. So now what are the strategies? What are the tactics that we are going to put in place across departments to get there? Okay, metric number 2, one of our faves, response rates. Who is accepting your invitations, right? No matter what your business model is, and here's that equation right there, right? So the households that say yes to your invitations over the total households that you have invited, right? no matter what your business model is, you are inviting people to do something, right? To donate to you, to register for classes, to volunteer, to audition maybe, to attend your exhibits. So we want to know how many are saying yes to these invitations. And you want to track this by segment. And you want to be consistent with your segments, with who they are, right? Be consistent with those segments so that you can see trends over time. If you're constantly changing the way you're categorizing, that's going to make it a lot harder for you to track and to measure. And then experiment. If your response rates aren't what you want them to be, then you're going to need to change your invitation to that particular group of people. And here's what this can look like. Okay, big chart, lots of colors, lots of rows, but it's okay. It's I'll talk you through it. It's not that complicated. This is a response report from one of our clients, and this is for a subscription campaign. But you could do this for any campaign that you have. And here you see in the first couple of columns that they've identified their segmentation strategy, right? The different categories of patrons, and then the message or the invitation or the particular campaign that is going out for that particular segment. The total number of households that is getting the mailing, and the number of responders who responded to that mailing. And then the response rate, which is auto-calculated, the math's already in here, so that you can see this rate by segment. Each segment has its own individual response rate. So looking at this after the subscription mailing happened, allowed this client to make some really smart decisions about subsequent mailings, right? So why don't we take a look at this, one of these green fields, this one row, FY18 one-time single ticket buyers. That's a really big segment, 14,000 people, right? And less than 1% responded. And as you can see, it actually cost more to mail to this segment than what they brought in. It's not a very good return on investment. So they decided, let's break this up and let's look for trends. Who are the best responders from this huge segment? Let's only mail to them. Look at this last one of these last segments, the one with a cost of sale of 800%. Well, they decided, let's stop mailing to them. We're not going to spend money there. In fact, let's instead make some smaller email segments and target these folks in a much more cost-effective way. So being able to see response rates by segment really allowed this client, and would allow all of you, to make those smart decisions and adapt and have more effective campaigns going forward. Okay, number 3, which is subscribers or members who also donate, or your subscriber donor crossover rate. And we're framing it using this particular language, but it's really about people who engage in more than one kind of activity with you. So I would think about how this would work within your particular context in your organization. If your programming is free, for example, maybe it's attendance plus donation, or maybe it's membership plus donations. The important thing that we're looking at here is active program engagement and philanthropic support. Because people who buy tickets or who attend programs and who donate are less likely to ghost you, right? They're going to be stickier. They're gonna stick around more, and they're going to do more with you. Frequency in engagement is actually a key factor in determining likelihood to return and increased investment in you. So if you do this calculation, you come up with this percentage. If it's low, then marketing and development folks, you should collaborate on a campaign just for these subscribers who aren't donating, okay? If it's high, then you're going to want to think about building your pipeline, because you've already talked to all of your best prospects and converted them into donors. So you need new folks, you need a new pipeline to start talking to. And then also in the short term, you are gonna wanna focus on those that you already have, those who you already have converted into donation, but try and focus on package upgrades, perhaps subscriber package upgrades, increased donations and upgrades, increasing that engagement and that investment in you. Okay. Number 4 is the reverse. Donors who also subscribe, or that reverse crossover. So how many of your donors are engaging in programs? And that is the equation, right? That donor subscriber crossover. Donors who subscribe over all of your donors. And organizations don't really look at it this way very often, but you should, because donors who don't participate in programming usually aren't your advocates. They may fund you, but they aren't deeply invested and deeply connected to the work that you're doing. They're not deeply connected to your mission. So that they're not going to be the ones who are making increased connections for you. They're not going to be advocating for you. They're not going to be connecting you with other networks of individuals who might be your supporters. They're not going to be the ones talking about your programming at their dinner parties and inviting their friends and telling them to bring their friends to your programs, right? So you need to get them involved, and you should listen to them. You should start by listening to them, reaching out. Maura, you have been so generous with us for all these years, but I haven't seen you in the museum for a really long time. Why is that? How can we get you back? Is it like a timing issue? Like, what's a great time for you to come and visit the museum? Or are there exhibits that you might be interested in attending that we haven't been really focusing on? Have a conversation, especially if they are major donors who don't attend. Make sure that dialogue starts to happen and you get that feedback. This is a really great way to kind of integrate the skills that our other department colleagues have in spades, right? You want to build some of that one-to-one relationship management that development does really well in that marketing language, in the asks that you are sending out for this. But this is really a shared goal, right? Of increasing these folks' involvement with all of you. Okay, number 5 is a metric that lets you measure patron feedback. And we recommend the Net Promoter Score. You're probably familiar with this. It's a score that your patrons will give you between 1 to 10 of how likely they would recommend you to a friend or colleague. And then that's followed up with open-ended feedback that allows them to explain why they gave that score. But the score isn't necessarily what really matters here. It's really the number of responses that you're getting. And really it's that ratio of promoters who are like the highest scorers, your passives who fall in the middle, and then the detractors, those who are scoring you low. And more importantly, and most importantly, it's that open-ended feedback, that qualitative data that you can mine from these surveys that's going to be really useful. You don't have to use NPS. We like it because it's fast and it's easy. It's quick, right? And a lot of people are familiar with it already. You see NPS used across disciplines and all over the place. And so people are familiar with it. It's not going to be too intrusive in their lives. And it provides you with real-time useful feedback that you can use throughout your organization to allow you to really get a sense of how your audience feels about you. So it's really a prime listening tool. And it's even better if you segment these surveys. It can be simple segmentation. It doesn't have to be super complicated, even if it's just ticket buyers versus donors. And maybe that's what's the most important thing to your organization right now, right? So that's what you want to measure. But if you are able to be more nuanced with your measurement, maybe you might want to look at new people differently from returning patrons, differently from subscribers, differently from donors, let's say, right? That kind of nuanced and the layers will allow you to dig in a little bit and understand where are you losing people along the way, and based on the feedback that you're hearing, how is their relationship changing with you based on their investment, where they are in terms of the amount they are investing with you, and the total number of engagements they have with you. How does that all play out? And how might you find trends and be able to glean some insights based on this survey data?
Tethra, I want to say just one thing about that last point about the nuance. And I'm working with 2 organizations right now, very different product, very different parts of the country. And we have pulled out this new to file group as a really important audience for us right now. And in one organization, it's really important because they've got product that is flying off the shelves. It's super hot. So they're getting people to say yes that would never have said yes before. And knowing that we have this huge volume of new people who are so different from the audience they typically serve, we've segmented them out and we've built a whole campaign strategy just to make sure that we're staying tethered to these new to file buyers. So these are new to file subscribers, which nobody has, right? I mean, subscription comes from single ticket buying, and we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new to file subscribers. So because we built this campaign, we know that we need to listen to them separately so that we can tell if we are meeting their expectations throughout that relationship, so that we know what the right offer is or the right invitation is when we get into subscription renewals. So that's one way that we're using that segmentation with new to file. With another organization I have, we've discovered that our patrons, our ticket buyers, have no idea what the organization does. They think they only do this one thing. And this is an organization that has deep roots and tentacles out into the community in all kinds of ways. And so we're using that new to file segmentation with our NPS to start to gauge how much they're getting about who we are. So we're putting more values messaging in front of new to file buyers, and we're talking to them separately before their first show. And what we saw is that these buyers, after coming to just one show with us, said, I felt so taken care of. This is stuff they're putting in their survey. We didn't ask them this. They're saying, you told me everything I needed to know. I felt welcome and ready to start this, at this event. And that was really validating. So that showed us we should do it all the time. We can't let go of it. So those are things that we're learning and using in this kind of listening segmentation right now, but it's really based on where you've got volume and where you want to see change in your audience, where you think there might be hurdles that you have to overcome. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but it's just, I'm right. I just had this conversation this morning, so I thought I would bring it in here. Thanks to
No, that's great. And having those like real world examples it's really useful to see how it's being applied, right? And the conversations that will allow that to open up, right? These are opportunities for you all to have conversations internally, because it's bringing up things that matter to your organizational goals and your interdepartmental goals. But it also allows you that opportunity then to directly connect and have conversations with your patrons. You're going to learn things from these surveys that you're going to want to follow up on and get more information about so that you can change things. Like, what if Eliza comes to you in one of these surveys and says, the concession experience that I had was horrible and terrible. I'm never coming back. You're going to want to get on the phone and talk to Eliza and say, Eliza, I'm really sorry to hear that you had a horrible experience with concessions. What could we have done to make that a different experience for you? And please accept this gift card, let's say, to our restaurant partner as a gesture, and come back to the next show on us. Get that feedback, make that connection, learn from her. On the flip side, Marco might say in a survey that that was the best performance that he had ever seen, right? And so call him and say thank you. Like, that's so great, Marco. Thank you so much for that feedback. You know what? We have more of that coming up, that kind of programming coming up. Would you be interested in subscribing? And that way you can see more things that you really love, just like the performance that you enjoyed. So you can hear kind of in that follow-up that those types of calls and those conversations can be made by development. They can be made by marketing. They can be made by box office, right? They can all be the ones on the phone following up with patrons. And in fact, they should be. This is a really great way to get everyone in your organization participating in managing and stewarding patron relationships. It can even be folks in programming. Your artistic director could be taking on a little bit of this and calling folks and getting that one-on-one feedback. It's really useful. Okay, so here is a really quick outline of what NPS is, what it looks like, and how it's structured. It's that on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague, that rating question. And then it should always be followed up with that second question. What is the primary reason for your score? And that gives them the opportunity for that open-ended feedback. You don't have to do this third question. I think it's good because it gives you even more data. Is there anything we could have done to make your experience more exceptional? So that's what NPS is. Okay, so to summarize all of this, we just went through the 5 metrics. Here are things not to forget as you start to bust down those silos, right? So with that metric, with that data collection and pulling out these metrics, set goals from your baseline, right? Get that baseline initially. Understand where you are so that you can start measuring your progress against those goals. Share the data. Don't hog your data. Let others know what you're seeing. Ask what they are seeing as well. Make it a regular sharing process. Maybe it's at your weekly meetings or your monthly staff meetings so that you all can share in the goals and you all can share in the accountability, right, towards those goals. Let your budgets reflect those goals. Don't set those goals like really good goals and like figure out a really good set of metrics that you can start developing and start collecting and then have that be completely separate from what shows up in budget line items. Like that disconnect is not going to allow for success in that sense, because then you're going to be doing stuff that isn't aligned with what your actual goals need to look like when it comes to black and white. So make sure that those are aligned so everybody's on the same page organizationally.
Can I give an example here too?
Yeah.
I have 2 different examples of clients that we have right now that are changing how they're articulating their budgets to be more closely aligned with goals. So the first is a dance company that said, we have to start thinking about relationships. We budget based on activity. Show 1, date 2, this is how much money we expect to bring in. Maybe we're looking at units, but really we're just looking at total revenue from our activities. And that's how we're budgeting. So we spent some time with them and they said, you know what? We still have to do that because that's a way that we have relationships with venues and we need this. But we're also going to start budgeting based on relationships. We want to see X percentage of that revenue come in through donors. We want to see X percentage come in from new to file ticket buyers. And so they've become much more nuanced in how they look at that. And it has changed the way their department heads, this is a big organization, it's changed the way that their department heads communicate with each other because we have to meet every goal on this budget now, not just the overall. So it's brought a lot more intention into campaign practices and a lot more collaboration. A second place where we're doing this is with an orchestra client who really wanted to think about single ticket buyers. Instead of just saying we want to have subscribers and single ticket buyers, and that's what our house is going to be made up of. We've got subscribers, and then we have several different categories of single ticket buying because they have a huge goal around bringing in new people and new different people. So they serve a wide area and they're doing some of this geographically. We want to see this many people come in from this core central area. We want to see this percentage of our audience come from rural communities or whatever it looks like. But you can see how when you start articulating it in your budget in that kind of nuance, it will change the way you have conversations about how you spend, where you spend your time, and how you allocate all of those resources to be able to achieve them. And just going through that goal setting motion is, as I started at the top of today, all about alignment. How do we get in the same boat? We're in the same boat. We know what our goals are. Let's start rowing to make sure that we hit every relationship goal that we've just articulated here. So that's what that can look like. And it is totally customizable to your organization, your goals, your relationships, your patrons. But it does bring intention and rigor to a process that lets you measure the effectiveness of what your campaigns are doing. Okay, back to you again. Thanks.
No, it's great. Great. Thanks, Caitlin. The last point is just listen throughout, right? So that you are learning and you are adapting. Okay, so we want to give you all some time together to talk through this, right? So we just outlined a bunch of things, 5 metrics. How might it work for you? For you as your department of multi-department of one in your thinking, or you within your own team and other teams. So we want to give you first some time to sit and reflect and think about, based on our conversation today, where do you see hurdles for silo busting, in the horizon for you? Like where are those challenges for you when you're thinking about breaking down these barriers and thinking in a much more aligned and holistic systems thinking, right? And then we're going to put you in breakout rooms, and we want to make sure that you all have a really nice diverse group of folks who are not just in your organization, so that you can share with each other, have a conversation, help each other solve these impediments, share the problems, share what your challenges are, what your opportunities are even, right? And help each other brainstorm and think about how you might solve this. What we'll do is we'll break you out. And I know that Caitlin has been putting folks into groups, and I think it's probably groups of 3 or 4 or 4 or 5, perhaps, Caitlin, right? Okay, yeah, great.
3 or 4.
Okay, so I think, Caitlin, we're going to break them out first, and then everybody should just kind of take a little moment and reflect. Or should we allow folks to do some reflection first before we break them out?
Let's give everyone about a minute or 2 minutes. I'm just going to mix some things up here in these rooms. Right. And then we'll give you, 20-25 minutes together. We'll send you some notes along the way so you know how much time you have left. So just one more thing. Once you get into the breakout rooms, just to help you get started, the person with the nearest birthday is gonna start talking. So I will stop talking right now and give you all like about a minute. So think about what you might want to jot down and share once you're in your rooms. And then once we're ready, we'll break you out. All right, I think we are all back here, and we just wanted to take a moment to first let you share what I did it to Nasher too. I mean, I really just biffed it. There was a plan and I had it, and then I pivoted and I didn't get my goals met. So I'm sorry to both groups where you were with your own people. I'm really curious to know how your conversations went. What did you learn from someone? What was advice that you got that you can see carrying through into your own work? What were hurdles that you just couldn't get over here? We've got a new small group and more minds around the table to share in that with you. So who's got us something to share?
I'll share.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth.
From Titus. I had a wonderful time talking with Teresa. And the topics that came up were, well, the importance of institutional marketing, to work with, I mean, in terms of barriers, we both have small staff, and particularly for Titus, our programmatic marketing comes out of the AT&T Performing Arts Center, and we're starting to work with another group on institutional marketing that's mostly social media. But the institutional marketing, like Teresa's organization was on the cover of the Dallas Morning News Sunday edition, and that has really leveraged a kind of visibility and feed, you know, it also encourages donors, patrons who are maybe on the fence to jump off the fence and into the celebration. And just at the end of our conversation, Teresa said something about listening to the community, because I'll let Teresa talk about it, but they're celebrating an enormous event, and she wants to tie into her community of people to figure out the best way to celebrate this thing. But I think one thing that came up is just many of us wear so many slash hats.
Yeah.
There's only so much time, and how to set up an infrastructure that promotes that kind of conversation, brainstorming, collaboration. That's a challenge.
You brought up so many good things there, Teresa. I see you wanting to chime in. So yes, please do. This notion of taking time, though, to plan, to actually get everybody aligned and participating, it feels like hard time to find. When are we going to find 3 hours where our schedules are cleared and we can focus on these strategic initiatives, our strategic objectives, or how we're deploying resources, whatever the question is that you want to ask, is so hard to find. And yet, I guarantee you that if you find it on the front end of the work, it will save you time as you manage all the way through the deployment of the work, right? But it's hard to do it. And I think you saying it now is a good reminder of how powerful that time is. Yeah, Teresa, you were maybe talking about listening, something else. I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I was just sharing with Elizabeth that it's so important to be active listeners. We were able to retire our construction loan debt through the SFOG money. And so we're planning a mortgage burning party. And so Elizabeth asked me if, you know, what were the plans? And actually, we are meeting with the committee on Friday of next week. And you know, now is the time for us to be really active listeners. So I've surrendered my will to the will of the community, and whatever that looks like, that's what we're going to do.
Love that. Knowing when you can respond entirely and cede any of that, you know, normal sort of control or delegation that so many of you have in your roles, and say, I'm here to listen. I'll do whatever it is you want. And then there are also times where we listen to understand, can I do what you want, right? We have this conversation with patrons. We don't. Our organizations that I work with have this conversation with patrons all the time, where we learn from surveys, from listening in other ways, from experiences that they have in front of house, that there's values that are so poorly aligned between the patrons and the organization, that it also lets us know when to cut ties with some relationships and say, man, we wish you all the best. There are other organizations that will be a better fit for what you do in this. But listening lets us do both of those things. Know when to let go and trust what your community is asking for and wanting to do, and when to let go of needing to try and serve a person, a group, a constituency for whom your programming, your ethics, your morals, your values, your direction is just not in good alignment. But it all comes from listening in that. So absolutely. Yeah. Who else had something in silos or silo busting? Yeah, James, please.
Hi. So one thing that actually, you apologize, but it was really helpful to have Chelsea and I on a call together, because we sit 20 feet from each other, but like, to your point, you never actually have the time to talk. So
then I rescind the apology.
yeah. So it's actually really helpful. Chelsea's on our external affairs team. I'm on our development team. And one of the things we were talking about the metrics that you all were proposing, and I think we have like 20 different ways that we sort of slice and dice things.
Yes.
And we need to, at least at the Nasher, we need to like truly pick like one or two things that in the next year, because everything's so complicated. There are so many question marks around things. The world is so chaotic. We need to pick like one or two things and like really focus on moving the needle on that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, just like institutionally kind of getting on the same page about like what that might be. Like, what are those like, you know, one or two or maybe three things that we're like really, really, really prioritizing. And then the second thing that we talked about also with Jennifer from Plano Civic Chorus is thinking about the mode of program delivery over the next year and what that balance between in-person and virtual is. I think it's a very different, you know, like set of challenges in performing arts versus the museum, but you know, at least from the perspective of the Nasher, we tried a lot of things over the last year in virtual programming, and I think not everything was successful, but I think there's a lot to be said for taking a lot of risk over the past year and getting comfortable institutionally with like some of the things we do were received well or popular, and some of the things we kind of, you know, fell really flat, but we got information, we learned from that experience. I think something historically that we've had really siloed at the Nasher is, you know, we'll have like member programming and public programming. I think the longer that I'm at the Nasher, the less I think that people actually always understand the difference between those things. I'm not convinced that our members know what's member exclusive versus what public programs they get a free ticket to. And so really thinking about how we're delivering programming and talking about programming and recognizing that it's perhaps not as siloed as we always think it is. So
super interesting. So challenging. Do we think we're siloed in ways that in fact our audience doesn't? They don't know how we're responding in that way.
I'd like to jump in just a minute on your, yeah, we were talking about the delivery method, and streaming is what we did, and I'm sure a lot of other organizations too. And it was a mixed bag. For our regular patrons, they didn't attend like we thought they would. But we attracted a lot of new first timers. And so some of them came back for the end of the season when we streamed as well, streamed on live performances. And so it's kind of a dilemma. How much do we do virtually and reach more people potentially, and more age groups that are less inclined to go out? And it's also related to ticket prices and so forth. We discounted streaming versus live concerts slightly.
Yeah.
And so it's a real dilemma. And like James said, it's a mixed bag.
Well, yeah. I mean, there can be an either or in this. And for some organizations, unions and other pieces will help make that decision for you just based on affordability. And so I don't know what that looks like in terms of resource for you. But where we have it, we're talking to organizations a lot about it not being an either or, but a both and, so that you can extend that outreach for new to file, but also particularly on the higher, on the older audience that you may serve, you can extend their ability to participate in your organization once if transportation were to become an issue, if they're not comfortable coming out at night, things that we see typically start to move people away from attending live performing arts. Can you actually extend long-term relationships in that? It's not always possible, and it might not always be the right answer, but I think there are ways of thinking about those layered, and I hear you saying that it's layered.
Well, and it's also potentially reaching a population that ages out of attending, like you said. And you're serving the community in just a different way. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing who you're serving in this, who are your goals? Who do you seek to serve in your work? And now that we have new ways and new paths of maybe moving that forward, how do we balance or weight these different priorities or different programming platforms against that? But knowing who we want to serve, true alignment there, these are our audience goals, will help support the conversation. It won't make the decision, but it'll certainly help support the conversation. James, what you said about needing to pick fewer metrics, I'm doing this with a client in 2 weeks because they are data savvy, super awesome, drowning in it. They have so much data. They ask their data whiz for a new data point every day, which he readily provides. And now we can't make anything out of this soup. It's impossible to know what went into the pot. And so we're taking a step all the way back and taking all the data off the table and bringing many more people to the table to have a conversation to say, what are our institutional priorities and how do we measure success against these? And intentionally focusing on metrics that require collaboration between 2 or more departments. Here is how we would measure this. Here's how we would measure this. And we're going to limit it to 3 to 5 for the year and then add more back in. But we're going to try and completely take it off the table, but we're not doing that siloed. We're doing that in a very democratic, very participatory process, in part to have those early conversations of where are we going? Let's make sure we understand what this institutional goal is, which can be a bit vague. If you're being handed something down from senior leadership, from your executive, from your board, you're like, well, what does that mean? How am I supposed to do that? And how does that work here? We're just collapsing all of the hierarchy, putting everyone around one table and saying, let's figure this thing out together and know what to measure and how to do it. So that's another one of those, take a step back, clear the table, and let's rebuild this. And it takes time, right? It's the time that you talked about, Elizabeth, Jennifer, it's how we're bringing all the right people together. Teresa, this is all internal listening. How are we listening to each other to really be able to figure this bit out? Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I just am curious, could you speak a little bit more to that process that with the group you're working with, just because that sounds like a cultural shift somewhat. And how did you get everybody on board?
Well, they asked for it, so that was easier. But this is a client that I've worked with for a couple of years in one department, super siloed in marketing. And marketing started asking these bigger questions. And so we said, well, what's stopping us from having the kind of teamwork that we want, the camaraderie across departments where there's a tremendous amount of friction at this organization? We said, well, part of the problem is that all of our budgets, all of our goals, all of our successes are in entirely separate buckets. And everyone said that's a problem. My staff won't work with your staff if it doesn't advance their goals, and they have this real territorialism and proprietary kind of nature. So it was leadership, it was senior leadership that said, I'm game for this. And we believe that this is going to help change the culture of our staff. So this is the first step really to change that culture, and we'll see if it works. I mean, I'm hopeful it will, but it's going to be a bumpy road because it's people, there's change in a pandemic, this isn't smooth sailing, but we've got something. Now I've kept you a minute past. Maura, you should take us out, though if anyone wants to stay for another few minutes, I certainly have time, but I want to honor your commitments as well.
Thank you, Caitlin and Chitra. As always, we just appreciate your feedback on any of these sessions. What worked, what didn't, how can we better serve you when we come back together the next time? Because we have 2 sessions left. So this feedback really, really matters to us. Greg's going to drop a link to our very short feedback survey into the chat. So if you could please just take a minute or 2, fill that out, and we'll also include it in an email following this. We hope today sparked some new ideas and new strategies. And as you plan your next steps, please remember to utilize our office hours with Caitlin, Chitra, and other members of the TRG team. Because y'all, this is free time with seasoned, experienced consultants. It is free. And we built this in so you'd have it between sessions. No question is too big or too small. We just ask that you register in advance so that they make sure that they're staffed well and that they can be there to answer any questions. Greg has also dropped that link in the chat to register for those. And our August office hours are August 26th, which is a Thursday from noon to 1 Central Time. As I said, we'll send an email out after this that includes that registration link for August office hours, the link to the feedback survey. Thank you so much for completing. There's a net promoter score question in there since we talked about that today.
Awesome.
And then make sure you join us in October for our session on listening to your team and to our and your communities. So thank you. Thank you so much, Chitra, Caitlin again, and have a great rest of the afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.